Thank you for checking back in on the Designated Pundits. This is MLS Team Preview number 27, and today we're talking about Sporting Kansas City. And we're back. I'm Bob here today with Scott and our special guest, Jimmy Mack from No Other Pod, to preview Sporting Kansas City for the 2026 Major League Soccer season. Jimmy, how you doing today?
I'm great. How are y'all doing?
It's, we're here.
We're almost there.
We're almost there. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. Bob, did you say this is like episode 27 of 30 for
27 of 30. We have 3 teams left to go, and we were going in order of roster preparedness, in which case, Sporting KC, we could film this preview in May.
Yeah.
Maybe we could keep putting it off.
Yeah, I think that's probably good for Sporting fans. We certainly don't feel prepared.
We're going to talk about that when we talk about roster build in just a little bit. But first, let's recap the 2025 season for Sporting Kansas City. 7 wins, 7 draws, 20 losses. Last place in the Western Conference. You went 0 for 2 in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. Started the season with 0 wins, 1 draw, 7 losses. And that includes CONCACAF Champions Cup. 1 win, 2 draws, and 10 losses in the last 13 Major League Soccer games. Going to how that happened, well, you were tied for really low in the West with 46 goals scored, 70 goals conceded, worst in Major League Soccer, and a minus 24 goal differential. That gave you guys last place in the West. Let's briefly recap the 2025 season.
Jimmy,
what do you think?
It's a rough year. What do you think?
It's so the thing that I would like to say about the 2025 season is it couldn't get any worse, but I'm not actually sure that that's true. So the 2025 season started off very strange because I don't remember how many winless games there was in a row. It was a lot. It started off with a weird CONCACAF Champions Cup berth, sort of on technicality. And we faced Lionel Messi and Inter Miami at home in like minus 20-degree wind chill weather. It was a weird start to the season. That game actually, as our first competitive game of the year, a little bit more competitive than we thought, and then it all went downhill from there, ultimately culminating with Peter Vermes being fired partway through the season. If you would have asked me on this show a year ago, what are the chances of Peter Vermes being fired midway into the season, I would have said virtually 0%. I would have thought maybe after the season, but I simply did not think that there would be a catastrophic drop-off enough to have him be fired midseason. And boy, was I wrong. And then, they implemented interim head coach Kerry Zavagnin. He brought his own little flair, if you will, to the team, a vastly different coaching style. This was the first time since I want to say 2009 that Peter Vermes had not been involved in some capacity with the team. And there was a little mid-season rebound, as you've shown on the screen here, from April to July after they made that change. They defeated St. Louis, went 6-4-5, and people thought, okay, maybe Kerry has the team a little bit back to where they could be a mid-table team. And then that just fell apart toward the end of the season, and this was a wooden spoon contending team. This offseason, there was such a significant chance for roster turnover because so many players were out of contracts, and then there was a new head coach coming, and there was a new president of soccer operations coming, a new general manager. I mean, it was basically a chance for a hard reset. So a lot of fans, I think, were hoping that 2025 would just be forgotten and we move on. But unfortunately, it seems like 2026 might be worse.
It's a tough thing. Looking at what Kansas City was last season, the offense surprisingly not as bad as some. It would be easy to say everything was bad, everything was terrible. The offense scored more goals than St. Louis, Houston, Colorado, RSL, and Austin. 2 of those are playoff teams.
Yep. Yeah.
And right, so 46 goals is not great. That's not going to propel you very far in the playoffs, but that was potential to propel you into the playoffs. I mean, Austin scored 37 goals, so
yeah,
you could have right? There's offensive production is there. Dejan Joveljic, as we're going to see in a little bit here, had an okay season by most standards. 18 goals to assist. The defense just really let you down. 70 goals conceded is a lot.
It's unacceptable. And you're right. The strength of this team was the attacking front. Dejan Joveljic is an all-star caliber striker. Daniel Shalhoub has had his ups and downs, but I would say is a solid MLS player. I don't think he's an all-star caliber. He had his one sort of standout MLS MVP level season, and the rest of it, he's been he's a serviceable winger.
He's a guy that I think if you underestimate him and you don't take him seriously, he will punish you for that.
Agreed. And if you game plan for him, then you can game plan for him and you can keep him under control. You just kind of have to know what you're getting into with him. And Manu Garcia, he was the new designated player number 10 who came in alongside with his former teammate from Greece, Shapi Suleimanov, on the right wing. And Suleimanov was a TAM player, and they came in with some high expectations. Now, they both faced some injuries throughout the season. You would see flashes when Joveljic and Manu and Shapi were all on the field at the same time. There were moments where you're like, okay, this is a talented squad in the attack. And then everything just fell off when you got to sort of the second level of the midfield and the defense, because there were so many injuries, so much inexperience, so much inconsistency that the offense couldn't keep up.
We do see in the offense a little bit of a tiered production here. And I'll kind of read this graphic for anybody listening and not watching. Dejan Joveljic, 18 goals, 2 assists, and then a drop. Daniel Shalhoub, 7 goals, 2 assists, respectable, but a big gap there. Eric Tommy, then 4 goals, 4 assists. Santiago Munoz, 3 goals, 2 assists. Suleimanov, 2 goals, 3 assists, and Manu Garcia, 2 goals, 7 assists. Is there a story there of Kansas City lacking other difference makers when a game was on the line?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. We had to start the season a second striker in William Agata that was ultimately traded away to Real Salt Lake, and that caught everybody off guard. And Agata was one who you would see that he was sort of overperforming a lot of times his expected goals. So you could argue maybe they sold at the right time, sold high, but he also did score a lot of goals. And there's something to be said for whether it's expected or not. The man found the back of the net more than 7 times in his first half season with Sporting Kansas City. So once he got rid of him, Eric Tommy's kind of a pseudo midfielder, pseudo winger. Santi Munoz is sort of like a pseudo attacking midfielder, pseudo striker. Daniel Shalhoub is there on the left wing, but he's not all that fast. Suleimanov was new and Manu was new, but they were also injured. There was no real second option to Dejan Joveljic. There wasn't the prime Johnny Russell or Benny Feilhaber or whoever was there in the past to help supplement who the prime striker was.
Awesome. Now let's talk a little bit about the players incoming and outgoing. I had to change the font size and the spacing on this graphic to get all the outgoing players here. If I could highlight a couple, maybe Tim Leibold, Nemanja Radoja, Memo Rodriguez, Kiri Shelton, been here for a long time. Eric Tommy now with the LA Galaxy. Robert Volader now, my hometown, playing with the New York Red Bulls.
Yeah.
Are there any players outgoing, and this is kind of the hard part about a team who doesn't have a lot of success. Are there any players here who are going to be missed or who make the team worse in their absence?
That's a difficult question. I hesitate to say, as weird as this is going to sound, because I did say it could get worse in 2026. I don't actually think there are teams or there are players here that make the team worse in the long term by their absence. I think this was a much needed turnover because so many of these players, Robert Volader, Eric Tommy, Kiri Shelton, Nemanja Radia, Tim Leibold, Logan Ndenbe, they had been with this team for 4 or 5 seasons. And we saw the ceiling of what this team with that makeup of the roster was. So individually, I think many of them are decent to quality players for an MLS team, especially if they're a depth piece. In this case, for multiple years, the sum was less than the parts for whatever reason. So yes, I do think Eric Tommy is still a good player who will contribute to the Galaxy. I think Logan Ndenbe could be a good left back for somebody. Robert Volader could be a good spot starter for the New York Red Bulls. But
his spot is 34 games. In case you missed that one, Red Bulls are hurting in the center back depth chart, and
yeah,
I am interested to see what he brings, because I always like to see when players who are individually skilled but part of very bad teams, how they do when they're, playing with someone else. I think of a player like Kamal Miller, who individually looks really good as a really great center back, but he's been part of some of the worst pairings in Major League Soccer. Like, is it him? Is he the problem? I don't know.
Yeah. It's a good question. And Valder is a very athletic center back, and he's a young center back too. He came in as a U22 player, and he had 6, 7, 8 game stretches where he looked like, hey, this is a solid starter. And then he had other games where I think his athleticism got a little bit of the best of him, and his head couldn't keep up with his athletic ability, and he found himself out of position, and that was that. But he was playing against the statue and Joaquin Fernandez. They brought in Alan Montez for like 7 games to see if that helped. That made it worse. Jansen Miller was okay next to him, but he was a rookie. Volader, if he doesn't have to be the guy and he can be sort of like the second center back and have like a more established guy next to him who can help sort of keep him in line, he could be a good player. But these are a lot of decent players that were in a lot of cases overpaid, and just Sporting needed turnover.
It does seem a case of addition by subtraction, and in a big way, I noticed that all these players out of contract, option declined, loan expired.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Kansas City literally was like, "Thank you." Goodbye.
The only one that they wanted to bring back was Santi Munoz. He was on loan for the season from a Mexican team, and they tried, and just terms didn't work out. But he wouldn't have been a starter anyway.
A few players in. There's a bit of a list here. I don't know that I want to read all of these names. Why don't you just go through a little bit and hit some highlights? Who on this list matters?
That's a great question. Are there highlights? I'm not sure. I guess the two that have, the immediate opportunity, I guess you could say, to potentially step in and get some playing time are Wyatt Meyer and Jaden Reed. We are so thin at center back. There's only 3 center backs on the roster, with Wyatt Meyer being one of them. So, 2 spots to start, and there's only 3 on the roster. He's got a decent shot. And we have basically no left back other than Jaden Reed, who can play at that spot on the roster right now. So those are 2 people that I would be very interested to see how do they do and how do they integrate into the squad early on. They came into preseason as trialists, and then they were signed via free agency, and they have 1-year contracts with the club with options for the following 2 years. Calvin Harris has made a little bit of noise in the preseason in the attack, but I don't expect that he will be a regular contributor or starter, given that the attack is probably the strength of this team.
I guess Justin Reynolds would be another candidate for one of those outside back positions, a trade from Chicago.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, we're probably going to see so much turnover. I mean, Jake Davis is probably the presumptive right back right now because he's played there the most, but that's actually bad for Sporting Kansas City because they need Jake Davis in the midfield, which is his natural position. Sporting Kansas City is so much better in the midfield when they have Jake Davis as either a number 6 or sort of that box-to-box number 8. But he'll probably have to play right back as he's played for the last couple of years out of necessity because Caden Pierre is too young and he's been injured, and who knows. You could see a combination of Justin Reynolds and Jaden Reed, but it's going to be a patchwork backline for a while.
If one of those guys can step up and do any sort of league average job, like that's the goal. And then Jake Davis can then move somewhere where he's actually better suited.
Yep, absolutely. If you could put Jake Davis in the midfield, and I don't mean to get ahead of myself a little bit, but if you could put Jake Davis in the midfield alongside Manu Garcia and maybe a Jacob Bartlett, that's probably best case scenario right now. It gives him more of that freedom to play in the midfield and the creativity. But there are so few players on this roster right now that you don't have a whole lot of options.
And I was saying that when I try to put these together, I use a couple of different sources. Not only do I keep my own depth charts throughout the season and I update them as we go, I try to keep track of incoming, outgoing players and, their historical positions. Even if you go on to, summary websites, stuff like Transfermarkt, stuff like that, you can find what position they've played in the past. I had to put a depth chart together And I was shocked at how few players there are on this roster. It looks like not enough players to play a Major League Soccer game.
Correct.
So we talked a little bit off air about this. What is the plan? Is it just going to be, bring in young kids to fill in the spots or what? Because it is 7 days away. Like, that doesn't seem like enough time to even sign a player and put him in the locker room.
No, it's not. It's not enough time to sign a player and really integrate them into the squad and put them in the locker room and such. It's a fantastic question. This team has 4 goalkeepers on the roster and 3 center backs. So it's, we're not doing all that well in terms of roster construction. And what is so frustrating, and I know I mentioned this to you briefly before we started recording, is that Sporting Kansas City had a real opportunity here and had been preaching roster reset and club reset with the firing of Peter Vermees and bringing in David Lee as the new general manager, Raphael Wicke as the coach, and then ultimately the majority stake in the team being sold too. There was an opportunity to really build excitement after years of underperformance. And right now, if you look at this depth chart, I mean, this is a wooden spoon team. I mean, that's my expectation, is that they are going to be last in the West and competing for the wooden spoon. Maybe best case scenario, let's say Jaden Reed sort of can play league average left back, like you said. Jansen Miller takes a little bit of a step and Ian James takes a little bit of a step, then 10th in the West, like, feels like best case scenario with the roster right now. And that's assuming 0 people get hurt, because there's no depth. It's just, there's a lot of apathy in the fan base right now.
At some point, we got to talk about the players on the field, but I do want to ask a question about the front office and the ownership. You kind of mentioned there's been an ownership change. You mentioned they were kind of teasing through the back end of last season that there was going to be a roster reset and change. I mean, we're seeing some of that, right? They let a bunch of older, I say older in the sense of just past players. They let a bunch of players go. Yeah, established players go. They let a bunch of roster guys go that they felt like weren't working out. Are they telling you anything else? Is the coach hinting at anything else, like in the media, to say, we have an identity we want to work towards, at least? Like,
I mean, it's hard. Yes and no. It's hard because even Raphael Wicke was appointed so late in the off season. I mean, Sporting Kansas City made the announcement that Raphael Wicke was hired on January 5th, and we got eliminated in like October. So there was multiple months of the off season, roster cuts and draft and a bunch of what should have been prime signing time with no coach. And then they signed Rafa Wicke, and MLS fans might know him from his brief tenure with Chicago, and that was underwhelming. And then he did okay in Switzerland. So it's just, they say that everything he said in the media is the same thing that you hear every coach say. We want to play high quality, attractive football. We want to make sure fans are entertained. We want to make sure that we play stout defense. What does that mean on the field? We don't really know yet. And we've seen them perform in the preseason for a couple of games, and they won their last 2 preseason games at the Coachella Valley Invitational. But what does that mean? Because preseason, especially with a roster that shouldn't look anything like it does halfway through the year, we don't really know how much to take from that. And preseason, you've seen it across all sports. Teams can go undefeated in the preseason and be terrible in the regular season, and vice versa. So there's so many unknowns now. What is the identity under Rafa Wicke going to look like? The last time we saw him in MLS, it wasn't great. David Lee, he I think people were excited at first, but in New York City, where he came from, he kind of had a reputation of taking a long time to do things, and we're seeing that unfold again here at Sporting Kansas City. And God knows what this new majority owner is going to be. I mean, every owner likes to say we're going to open the pocketbook and spend. The A-League said that before they sold it, and that was ultimately, you saw Peter Vermees at the end of his tenure get more and more upset that he did not have money to spend. So there's so many unknowns for the fan base right now.
Yeah, question marks all around. When I think of preseason, do you think post camp is a guaranteed starter? I am about to transition into that. I think that preseason, the only real useful information that you get out of preseason is you get a really good glimpse at intended like style and shape and like actual tactics.
Mm-hmm.
If the teams actually like put it up on YouTube or something,
Yeah.
if they actually broadcast it, if that has happened, that was my question, is if that has happened and you've had a couple of those preseason games to kind of see at least like some of the shape, can we then like start looking at these players, starting with the goalkeeper position and saying, all right, what is this at least shape going to look like, and maybe some of the intention on the field?
Yeah, we're seeing a little bit of it. I mean, to answer the question, yes, John Polskamp's going to be the starter. They had mentioned that they wanted to bring in a veteran to sort of help push him, and then they signed, Stephen Cleveland, and he's not going to push Polskamp in terms of competing for the starting job. Polskamp was a decent starter last year, I think. Many of the it's hard to say that when they gave up 70 goals, but you'd see many cases where Polskamp's left out to dry by his defenders, and what's he supposed to do? And there are also a bunch of times where Polskamp saved Sporting Kansas City points, which is crazy to say considering they were last in the West. So I do think Polskamp is the starter. In terms of the shape and style, I don't honestly think it will look all that different from what we saw last year yet, simply because Wiki and David Lee, quite frankly, haven't brought in players to play a different style. Like the majority of the contributors who are left are holdovers from the Peter Vermees 4-3-3 days. So Dan Jovlic, Shoppy, Daniel Shallowy, Manu, like sure, maybe you might see it shift a little bit more into a 4-4-2, and you could see Daniel and Dayan up top with Manu and Shoppy sort of in those sort of outside midfielder roles. But we haven't been able to see quality signings yet to really see a huge shift. There are some rumors. I mean, Sporting Kansas City has been rumored to go after some young center backs and some young wingers internationally. So clearly they see obviously a need at center back, but also some need to bring in some more pace and attacking prowess on the wing. So that probably tells you a little bit, is that they want to find some people to help support Dayan more than Shoppy and Daniel can right now. But I don't think it will look, at least to start, all that different than it did in the second half of last year under Kerry Zavagnin.
We're going to jump into the depth chart that I made up in just a few seconds, but there are some more questions here. Spanish follower here. How was Manu Garcia's first season? Feels like MLS suits him well, and I would be pretty surprised if he didn't majorly outperform his numbers in 2025, although I haven't seen the games. Well, I mean, he's on an island, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. He should. I mean, honestly, I think Manu has the opportunity to make the biggest jump year over year for Sporting in terms of how much he contributes. It really hinges on, can he stay healthy? I mean, last year was his first year with the club. He came in as a designated player number 10, so there was a lot of sort of pressure on him. I think when he was healthy and on the field with Dayan and Shoppy in particular, you saw clear moments of brilliance. I mean, he is that creative force in the midfield who can pull the strings from a technical standpoint that, quite frankly, Eric Tommy was never able to do when he was playing the number 10. Eric Tommy's much more of like a put my head down and just run toward the goal type of player. And Manu's one who's more able to pull the strings. Where I think would really help Manu is if he could have Jake Davis in the midfield instead of Zoran Basong. Jake Davis is just so much more technically adept and so much more attacking minded than Zoran Basong. Jacob Bartlett is a fine number 10, but Jake being in the midfield with Manu will really help be the link between what will probably be a subpar back line in the midfield, because quite frankly, Manu just couldn't get the ball a bunch of the time last year because Sporting's back line just couldn't get it up to him.
Now let's look at the depth chart here. Starting with the fullbacks, we want Jaden Reed as a backup center back. No choices. He's out on the left side. Jake Davis, you want in midfield. No choices. He's going to be out on the right side for the fullback. Jimmy, unless you have a pair of shoes you're going to throw on and get on the field.
You don't
yourself.
Want me at right back. I play center back in the media game, and let me tell you, after 8 minutes, I am gassed.
At center back, Jensen Miller and Ian James with Wyatt Meyer maybe providing some competition and cover.
Super young back line. Super young back line with a super young goalkeeper. I mean, there's Jensen Miller stepped up last year due to injury, and in some games performed very well, and in other games showed that he was a rookie. Ian James, I think, is 17 or 18 years old now. So again, all the potential in the world. I mean, it was sort of like when Sporting had Eric Palmer Brown back in the day, all the potential in the world, they just never were able to capitalize on it before he left. So they're hoping to do something different with Ian James, but they're so young. When Jake Davis, who's like 23, 24, I think, is the veteran on the back line, and he shouldn't even be on the back line. I think that's your by far biggest hole in this team right now.
And that'll be something to watch going forward. The other thing that I'm kind of interested now that you just teased is that midfield pairing. That right now we're looking at Jacob Bartlett and Zoran Basong.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how that works as like a double pivot, because usually the double pivot protects the back line. You get those two players in. Maybe you don't have a single really great destroyer, but the two of them have the defensive work ethic to do the job together. And you kind of just tease that both of them are a little bit more, I don't know, I don't know, like offensive minded.
Well, so Bartlett can be a solid number, like traditionally a solid number 6 if you sort of have like the 6, 8, 10. Zoran's a weird one because Zoran has played left back, he's played left wing, he's played in the midfield. He's sort of like Sporting KC used to have Jimmy Madronda, who could just sort of play like anywhere on the field, and Zoran's kind of stepped into that role. They have done a double pivot, especially under Kerry Zavagnin, with these two players, or with Nemanja Radia when he was on the roster. But Sporting would do well to sign a quality number 6 who could really be the anchor of that center midfield and connect the back line to the rest of the midfield. I would rather see Jake Davis in there instead of Zoran Basong, because he and Jacob Bartlett could rotate a little bit more. Bartlett can do well in the attack, but he's also a decent number 6. Same with Jake Davis. Zoran Basong sort of just there out of necessity right now. I do agree. I think it'll be closer to a double pivot if it is Bartlett and Zoran Basong, and I think that's just out of necessity because, like you said, they have to protect such a young back line. But again, that gets back to sort of the problem that we had last year is as Kerry Zavagnin shifted to more of a double pivot to try to protect a bad back line, it left the offense so disconnected from the defense that it didn't really give many quality attacking chances, which ultimately led to Dejan being the only goal scorer really and nobody else having opportunities.
Looking up into that offensive unit, it does start to look more like an MLS level offense.
Yeah.
Manu Garcia had 6 assists last season. You've talked about him already. You've got Shapi and Shalawi and Dejan Joveljic. Joveljic and Shalawi, of course, are veterans and known quantities. Shapi was the incoming DP.
TAM player, yeah.
Or sorry, yeah, TAM player. This offensive unit at least did produce some, quite a reasonable number of goals last season. I guess the question is competition. Shalawi is been in the league a long time, not the youngest guy on the field. Depth again looks really thin.
Yeah. I think the one who has the biggest opportunity to take a step forward in the front 3 is definitely Shapi Suleimanov. He came over, like I said, from Greece with Manu Garcia. He's got a just incredible motor. Like the dude is just always running. And what's so funny is off the field, he's like a pretty quiet guy. And then on the field, he's going to be the first one to fight somebody if his teammate goes down. Like everybody says, he's the one who will be the first one to get in a scrap if he needs to be. So, and there's something to be said for a team like this, kind of having a guy like that, who's just willing to go head first into a conflict and sort of fire up the team a little bit. Cause it used to be Benny Feilhaber. That's not what Manu Garcia is like. Dejan can be that a little bit. So Dejan and Shapi are sort of like the emotional engine of this team, especially in the attack. Daniel Shalawi is super interesting because I think, like we talked about before, we know what Daniel Shalawi is at this point. He's a solid MLS player who, if you underestimate him, can make you pay. And if you game plan for him properly, you can really control him. So I think that actually gives Steven Afrifa, who I would say is maybe in sort of like a make or break year, a real opportunity to try to push for some minutes. He's very talented. There's just been, it seems, some sort of like mental block that hasn't allowed him to really put it all together on the field. They were very high on him in the preseason last year, and then he just simply kind of couldn't translate it to the regular season. He's got all the talent in the world. If he can get it right mentally, there's an opportunity for Steven Afrifa to actually challenge Daniel Shalawi for consistent minutes.
In the 2021 season preview, I said Daniel Shalhoub was going to have a great season, and he scored 16 goals, 7 assists that year. I would love to see him do something like that again. One of my favorite things about Daniel Shalhoub is that I guess he's ambidextrous, because if you look at him on anything and it says foot, it says both. So that's great. Yeah, for all the things SKC, you have a winger with 2 feet. That's always very nice to have. Can he and Shoppy, do you think, recreate some of that magic that we had when him and Johnny Russell were playing together?
It's possible, because in a weird way, Shoppy and Johnny are somewhat similar players, at least when Johnny was in his prime. I think Johnny was maybe a little bit more technically adept than Shoppy is, but they're both high energy players who will drive right at the defender and try to make them miss. Johnny, as he got older, got a little predictable when he's going to go to the end line, try to cut back in or try to split a defender, and they were able to figure that out. Shoppy's a little bit more of an unknown quantity. Shoppy's biggest issue right now is he is incredibly one-footed. Like, he always tries to get the ball onto his right foot. He has to figure out, which is not great if you're coming in from that right wing and you need to take the ball off your left foot at goal. It's good for crossing. It's not good for scoring. And if you watch Shoppy in games last year, there were so many opportunities where if he had even just half the confidence in his left foot that he had in his right foot, he'd be able to put the ball in the back of the net, and he just tries so hard to switch it over. And by the time he does, it's too late and the defenders close down. So if he's worked on it in the offseason, great. And that'll give him that much more ability to be more of a threat on the right side.
Which is where I was going, because I see him listed everywhere as a left-footed player. So that's why I brought the Johnny Russell comparison, because I remember Russell cutting into the box and the ball's already on his left foot, take a shot.
Yeah, he needs to get both feet under him, because it's too much right now to be such a one-footed player, and hopefully he can figure it out. I think he and Manu are so familiar with each other that having Manu being the starting midfielder or the starting central attacking midfielder is super advantageous for Shoppy, because they know each other's tendencies so well. So if they can both stay healthy, then they can both have big years.
That is an interesting one, actually, to hear the disconnect between like the sites that do list him as left-footed and that he's kind of this right-footed player. What about the depth there with Calvin Harris? Do you see that as like a viable competition point where if Shoppy's not figuring out how to be a little more effective, that he could lose that starting role?
It has to be. There's sometimes competition because there's no choice. I don't. If Peter Vermees was the coach still, then the answer would be hands down yes. If somebody's not performing or you get on Peter's bad side, he would yank you and you wouldn't see the field for 10 games. I don't think Rafa Wicki is quite the disciplinarian that Peter was. So I guess it depends on how much Calvin Harris is progressing in sort of training. But Shoppy, if he's not performing, then this team is not an MLS Cup competing team this year. So if he's not performing, you might as well see what you have in Calvin Harris, or that might be why they're trying to go after some of these other wingers, because there's a winger currently in the Polish first division, Kapita. He's 21 years old. There's been rumors for the last 4 or 5 days that Sporting Kansas City have been trying to go after him, in a couple $1 million move. So clearly they feel that they need more depth on the wing, because they are not happy solely relying on Daniel Shalhoub and Shoppy Suleimanov.
Outside of the projected starting 11, who do you think is the player most likely to win a starting job during the season and hold on to it?
I think it's Steven Afrifa. I think on that left wing, he can push Daniel Shalhoub, which I know Daniel Shalhoub has been around for a long time, but any Sporting fan will tell you that Daniel Shalhoub is an incredibly streaky player. He can go, 3-4 games in a row, scoring, a goal or two in each match, and then he'll go 12 games without sniffing the net. And it's in those moments when he's having a real cold streak, if he can't put it together, that Afrifa has the opportunity to come in as a younger player who's got more pace than Daniel Shalhoub to use his natural abilities to snag that spot and not give it back to Daniel Shalhoub.
you've already teased that this team isn't a cup contender, and that if they don't do something about the roster, they're a wooden spoon contender. Realistically, where do you think they finish?
I mean, realistically, they're a bottom 3 team in the West, and a real wooden spoon contender. I'm not going to sit here and guarantee that they're a wooden spoon winner because it's MLS. Anything can happen. And as you mentioned, the attack on its best day can be a competent MLS attack. It's just a question of how many goals will this team let in. If the back line performs halfway competently, then sure, yeah, this could be a 10th place team, maybe best case scenario like a 9th place team in the West. I don't see that happening. Certainly, at least not without the depth, because Sporting Kansas City have never gotten through a whole year without being injured in some capacity. And it doesn't help that you start the season in Kansas City and it's going to be freezing, and then you get to the summer, even though there's a World Cup break, but you get to the summer and it's 100 plus degrees with 80% humidity. It's just, you need depth for rotation.
You do need depth for rotation. I guess the other question I want to ask about realistic expectations, this new look defense, do you have a realistic expectation that they're going to do better? I find it hard to believe that they're going to actually be, much worse than last season's group.
Yeah, it's hard to be worse than they were last season. So, I mean, on one hand, you could look at it and say, okay, well, things can only go up, or they could stay the same. And part of the problem was that there was, I guess one advantage to having no depth is there's no depth, so you can't have as much inconsistency in game-to-game lineups. If you want to put it, the nicest possible spin on this, because that was part of the problem last year is there was like only a handful of games in a row where Sporting Kansas City used the same backline lineup over the course of the year. But when there's so many unknowns, when you have such young players that you're relying on the back line, and one of them's not playing their natural position at least, and Jake Davis, it's hard to look at it and say with any level of confidence that it will be meaningfully better than it was last year.
I do have some stats here. There were 11 games where Sporting KC conceded 3 or more goals, and that's compared to 4 clean sheets, to give you a little idea of how bad things were. But Jimmy, let's talk for people watching this episode. Most people watching this show are not going to be Sporting KC supporters. So if we turn on Sporting KC throughout the season, what are some storylines we can follow? What are some things we can keep an eye on throughout the season?
I think from sort of like a fan culture perspective is, this team 10 years ago was one of the flagship teams in the league in terms of supporter culture, attendance, the stadium that had been built at the time, etc. And it has fallen to near the bottom in just about every single one of those categories. I mean, the stadium's still nice, but compared to a lot of the new stadiums, it's very small and it's starting to show its age. So how much support is what used to be a diehard soccer city giving this team, especially when you have the Kansas City Current, just across the state line, who are still a very quality team, even though they kind of laid an egg in the playoffs last year. They're still, they have a Ballon d'Or candidate in Tim Wachawinga. So there's such a thing as fan width, and especially now when everybody, is feeling how expensive things are, there's such a thing as people have to prioritize where they spend their money. So watch how many fans are actually there in attendance at a team that once had like 180 straight sellouts. Number two, what does the Rafa Wiki era and the David Lee era of Sporting Kansas City end up looking like, 3, 4, 5 months into the season? How has the identity shifted from where it was this 4-3-3 high-speed attack under Peter Vermees? Are they still playing a 4-3-3? Is it more of a traditional 4-4-2? Have they shifted to something entirely different as they get more players in? And who are the players they will bring in? They have to get more players in this transfer window, and they certainly have to get some players in the summer transfer window. Otherwise, this is going to be potentially one of the worst seasons in Sporting KC history.
How much time do you think Wiki is given? The roster is not what it should be.
Yeah.
But like, what is the patience, do you think, for him?
It's a great question. I mean, I would say it probably has to be at least 2 years. I mean, then again, I said a year ago that I don't see any reasonable way that Peter Vermees is fired in the midseason. But he signed a 2.5-year contract with Sporting Kansas City, which I think is really interesting because 2.5 years through the 27-28 season with an option for 28-29, that right there kind of tells you that like David Lee and Sporting's front office aren't inherently convinced that Wiki is the long-term guy, because you don't typically see a head coach signed to a 2.5-year contract. The last contract Peter Vermees signed was like an 8-year contract. So I think they'll give him this season, and the earliest I would say we could potentially see a move is partway through next season. And that is only assuming that over the course of this season and the offseason, David Lee brings in a number of quality players, and we are just simply not seeing any improvement from where the team was last year.
And technically next season's only a half season anyway. So
I think that's the confusion. That's why it's 2.5, is because, and that's why I think, after that mini season before they do the schedule reset, that would be the best opportunity to switch things up. If you can tell after a year and a half, we're not anywhere better than we were a year and a half ago.
No team will lose all of their games. Everybody will find a way to win something.
Mm-hmm.
Even bad teams. Which styles do you think this Kansas City team, can maybe take advantage of, especially that offensive unit that is a little more MLS ready?
Yeah.
What do you think they match up well against?
I mean, I think that offensive unit is good enough that if things are on their best day, they can put up, 2, 3, 4 goals. So a team that is maybe a little bit more of a pressing team, where if Sporting in the midfield can steal a ball in the midfield and catch them on the counter, between Shapi and Dayon and Manu and even Daniel Shallowy, if you can get them all running on the counter and catch with a numbers advantage, then I think that's Sporting's best opportunity. They're going to have to sort of sit back and help this defense because they're not going to be able to leave them all on an island. So it's as the opposing team is up pressing, playing a high back line, if you can steal a ball and do a quick switch and get some numbers going the other way on the counter, I think that's Sporting's best chance.
I also think, like, sometimes we ask this question and we talk about actual tactics like you have just done, pressing teams. I think the other thing is teams whose coaching staffs are not that adept at game planning, and game management. I think teams that struggle to effectively adapt their game plans and adapt their game management will be surprised by this Kansas City team, and especially that offensive unit, because Dejan Joveljic will take advantage of opportunities that he gets. He was sometimes wasteful in LA when he was getting chances by the bucketful, but in Kansas City, last season, very quietly scoring 18 goals or whatever it was. I think teams that don't game plan will find themselves in awkward positions against this Kansas City team throughout the season.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, he was relatively efficient last year. I mean, he had 41 shots on target and converted 18 of them into goals. So he's, largely taking advantage of his opportunities that he had last year, at least compared to, like you said, his time in LA at times. And he didn't have a Ricky Puig level player with him in Kansas City like he did in Los Angeles. So yeah, I think, if they're not adept at game planning, or if they are looking ahead to maybe it's a midweek game and they got a bigger game on the weekend or something, just sort of being, it's Kansas City, especially if it's in Kansas City, we're not going to really worry about it. Sporting can catch some teams off guard in that sense.
And let's talk about the flip side of that. Kansas City, we expect the team to go out and work hard every week, but which styles do you think of play will Kansas City most struggle against?
If a team gets a lead early and bunkers down and parks that bus, I just don't. I mean, that's what Sporting Kansas City struggled with most last year, is just there wasn't enough, to break down or catch up if they fall behind early. And we saw that time and time again. This team was not built for a comeback. They're built for If they can keep it close and steal one on the counter, they can get some points that way. But if they're playing a high flying, attacking team that controls the midfield very well and really doesn't let Sporting get past the midfield line, then Sporting's going to have a real tough time.
Now, with such a young roster, the next question is really going to be interesting for me. Which player do you think is going to have that opportunity to really grow their career in 2026, take that next step? Which player improves the most this season?
So Jake Davis is the one who, if he is used properly, I think can really show, because everybody in Kansas City knows what Jake Davis can do. But I think if you were to ask most people around the league, like, who's Jake Davis? They'd be like, I don't know. I've never heard of him. Is he a spokesman for State Farm? But he's a quality midfielder who, if given the opportunity, can be an MLS All-Star caliber player at midfield, not at right back. He's a serviceable right back, can be a great midfielder if given the opportunity with the right pieces around him. So I think he has an opportunity to really try to make a name for himself as more of a central piece of this team. The problem is he still doesn't have enough pieces around him really to give him that opportunity, but he's the one who I think could be most suited if the dominoes fall correctly, if they get in some more defenders, if they get in some people that allow Jake, in a couple of months to move into that midfield role. I think he could surprise some people.
And the flip side to that, is there anybody on the roster who you think will take a step backwards this year? And I guess I want to sort of put up a condition on this. I'm not necessarily looking at like the 17-year-old center back Ian James, who will be in a situation that is, unusual for him.
Right.
Players who are actually, regressing and taking steps backwards.
Yeah, I'm not trying to pick on him, but I think it's Daniel Shallowy. I mean, he's approaching 30 years old. We've seen his prime. We've seen his ceiling. There have been people in the Sporting Kansas City fan base who have grown more frustrated with him over the years as he's continued his sort of streaky career. He had that 1 year in 2021, like you predicted, Bob, he would have. And he's never really been able to replicate it. And he's sort of been riding high off that year in the years since. And I mentioned Stephen Afrifa earlier. He was the other one I thought about going back and forth with Jake Davis in terms of who could really take a step. I guess he and Daniel kind of go hand in hand. If Daniel regresses and Stephen Afrifa gets in for a couple games and takes control, then we might see this year could be the end of sort of that starting left wing spot for Daniel Shallowy.
Maybe you just need me to manifest it. You just like Daniel Shallowy, 15 goals, 2025, 2026. Let's go.
If it happens, then we'll just know that I got to come on here every year before, and you just got to predict that Daniel's going to, have a banger year.
Any final thoughts about Sporting KC before we wrap up the 2026 prediction episode?
I just think it's a super fascinating year, probably not for a neutral standpoint, because I think Sporting will be a relatively boring team for most neutrals to watch. But, this was an off season where at least, myself and many other in the fan base thought this was a chance to reset for the club. Okay, the Peter Vermees era is over. We have a new president of soccer operations and GM and David Lee, new coach, new players, new everything, now new owner that we hear about. And there was this opportunity to make a splash and come into this year, not expecting to compete for a championship, but being like, okay, we are moving forward on the right track. And it feels like we've just sort of been stuck in the mud spinning our tires, and we haven't really gone anywhere from after Peter Vermees was fired. And then Rafa Wicki gets hired, and maybe he ends up being a great coach, but that's not the type of hire that really like inspires a fan base, especially since many of MLS fans last saw him with a disaster Chicago Fire team. People are just kind of like, oh, that we're just that mid to small market Kansas City team that so much of the rest of the country thought we were. And we had our glory days from like 2010 to 2017, and it seems like a long way away now.
All right. Well, the Sporting KC front office may have forgotten that soccer starts next week, but we haven't. 3 more episodes, and we'll have previewed each and every one of the 30 Major League Soccer teams. We hope you join us. Go check out Jimmy Mack and No Other Pod if you are a Sporting KC fan. Always really great content there. Always nice having you on. Jimmy, thank you for taking the time out to be here with us today. And thank you everyone at home for following along. Have a great week.